Hello there, and welcome to a special episode of the TIlehurst End podcast. I'm Ross, and we don't have Ben here today, but we are joined, very, very luckily, by Al Clement. Al, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm a bit hot, but other than that, I'm all right.
It's definitely warm in the UK right now, but we're very very excited to have Al Clements. He has written a great book, Magic Hat, Madejski, McGhee, and Reading Football Club. You got contributions in there from Shaka Hislop, from John Madejski. So obviously something very exciting for Reading fans. Alan, we're very excited to have you here today. So we're just going to dive right on in. We're just going to go straight into an interview here. So this was your first ever book, Alan, that you put together. It's a remarkable achievement and a fantastic choice of subject for your first book. But just before we even get into that subject, what was your experience like of writing it? How did you find it?
It was a lot of fun. I wrote far too much to begin with
Yeah.
because I love doing all the research. I sort of look back to for context, I look back at the teams through the 80s and I wrote loads about that. And then I had to cut that from the book. But the best thing about it was getting to meet my heroes over
Yeah.
Zoom. I sort of started just after the pandemic when Zoom was, really taking off. And yeah, it meant it was really easy to have a chat with people. And it was, I think I spoke to between 15 and 20 people involved with the club at the time. So
Wow.
it was, yeah, it was great. These guys are my heroes. They're still my
Yeah.
heroes. I was 18 at the time that we got promoted, and it was, yeah, amazing time.
Yeah, and I think really just it was just like an era that has formed the foundation sort of for the Madejski, kind of era that we're still living in. We're still in that stadium, obviously.
Yeah.
So what was it? You mentioned that these guys are your heroes, but first ever book that you wrote, what was it that made you decide, this is what I want to write about?
Um, I think I'd always thought about writing about it. I knew that no one else had written about that period,
Hmm.
so I knew it was kind of available as a thing to do. Um, and it was a really happy time following Reading for me. It was a difficult time for me, sort of mentally. I would say I was quite lonely at that time, but it was the football gave me a real focus in my life, and it was,
Hmm.
yeah, it was an amazing time to be a Reading supporter and to follow that. So it was, yeah, that was what made me really want to write about it, was sort of what, not just what I got out of it, is what it did for me as well. So and I
Yeah.
wanted to write about, what it's like to be a fan as well. It's not just a book about Reading, it's a book about being a football fan. And
Yeah.
yeah, it also, as you alluded to, it was the foundation for sort of where the club went. It was, Madejski was pretty tight with his money to begin with, and when he saw what was possible, when Mark McGhee's team did what they did, it showed what was possible, and I think that really changed his approach to the club, particularly in the early 2000s when he started investing a lot more in the playing staff, and it made a huge difference to the
Hmm.
club in the long term. And all of that comes from sort of Mark McGhee and that period. So yeah.
It is a kind of running joke. I'm going to ask you to set the scene for the whole era in a moment, but it is a kind of running joke on this podcast that I don't know who Mark McGhee is or was, and obviously that changes with your book. But tell us who he is. What role does he have in this story? And he's obviously one of those guys that you spoke to for this. So, kind of, what was that experience like?
Uh, Very intimidating because
Yeah.
he's a football manager. He's
Yep.
hugely confident person. As a footballer, he was superb. He won European Cup Winners' Cup with Aberdeen against Real Madrid. He
Yeah.
joined
Incredible.
Hamburg in Germany when they were European champions. he played for Celtic. He won Scottish Cup, Scottish League, top scorer in Scotland. Won the league with Aberdeen, sort of early in his career. Just a really incredible player who played in Europe for like 10 seasons running. And then came to Reading for his first managerial job. It was sort of out of the blue. He was recommended by a Premier League manager, which was Alex Ferguson, and it
His
was
manager at Aberdeen, that would have been, right?
exactly that's how they knew each other. And Ferguson was just sort of aware that his career was coming to an end, and said, get yourself into coaching, and recommended him to Reading.
Incredible. Yeah. So, before we really dive into the into the era and all those kinds of things, tell me about the process of naming the book, because we've gone with Magic Hat. I always think of that as, nowadays it's Lewis Wing who's got the magic hat over obviously in Reading. But is that referring to Mark himself? Tell us about the reason for calling the book Magic Hat.
I wanted something catchy. It's book titles can often be too long, particularly when they're about sports. And obviously this has a really long sort of subtitle, but it really grabs you, I hope. And obviously it's a song that the Reading fans used to sing about Mark McGhee in happy times. And then they adapted it in less happy times to berate him for the choices he made.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that. Obviously, kind of went from quite a hero to a pantomime villain, as it were. So all right, I'll set the scene for us, Al. Obviously, it's the end of the 80s. It's the start of the 90s, and Reading are in a situation that no Reading fan listening to us will be able to relate to in recent years.
No, not at all.
Serious debt, serious financial issues. So set the scene for us.
So the manager was Ian Branfoot. He was sacked for I think there was a drink driving event that happened, but also he didn't disclose bids that he'd received for players to the club, and so the club didn't feel it was tenable for him to stay. I should jump back and start with John Madejski. So, the club were in huge financial trouble. They'd put the whole squad up for sale. And, John Madejski likes to trot out the line that the club started trawling around for rich suckers. And he was the sucker that got drawn in. So, he came in. He had Ian Branfoot in charge. And then, as I described, he left the club under something of a cloud. And Mark McGhee was drafted in. He actually came in for the last game of the season. So he's very proud of his 100% record in his first season with Reading, and that he won one game 1-0. So he came in as player manager, which his career was winding down, I think is fair to say. But he came in alongside Colin. He brought in Colin Lee. When he arrived, there was, I think, physio John Hazelden and himself were the staff, because the youth team coach Stuart Henderson left, and he had to build from the ground up. He just had sort of nothing to begin with. He actually tried to get a different coach to begin with before approaching Colin Lee. I think it was a guy called Billy Stark, who he knew from Aberdeen, but he decided not to join the club. And it was sort of fortuitous for Reading that didn't work out, because his partnership with Colin Lee proved to be hugely successful. So
I think it's quite interesting how many Aberdeen connections there are just through the first 10 minutes of us talking here. Obviously, Mark McGhee being recommended by Sir Alex Ferguson, so that makes sense. But it is remarkable how many similarities there are to that club being so far away from Reading.
Yeah, it's McGhee was. He's like any manager, really. His contacts are sort of the people he's played with and the people he's been coached by. It was a lot of the players that he signed were from clubs that he played for. He brought in several Newcastle players at the beginning. He brought in Kevin Dillon, who was a great player for Reading. He brought in Ray Ranson later, obviously himself coming from Newcastle. I'm sure there's one more, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But he brought in Steve Archibald for one game, who he played with at Aberdeen. There was who's the defender? There's a defender he brought in for half the season who he played with at Cooper, I think Neil Cooper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think he brought him in that first season. But yeah, his first season in charge was absolute mayhem. He played well over 30 players. It was like something like 38 players played for Reading in his first
Wow.
season
Okay.
in charge. He was
I'm
just
surprised
like,
you didn't see Willie Miller at that rate.
yeah, there could have been anybody coming in.
Yeah.
But he had so many players that he played. He played loads of kids from the youth team. He had
Wow.
I think it was only 5 loans, but he managed. I think there was an emergency keeper who signed as well, so he ended up like six loan signings that season. And it was utter chaos his first season.
Utter chaos. Do you kind of you were writing this? I think you mentioned to me just off air in sort of 2021 and 2022 and the years through that. And obviously there was a parallel Reading crisis going on, at
Yeah.
that time. Like, did you see a lot of similarities when you were writing between that era and the era that you were living through?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, on the within the club, definitely that there was the stability within the club in terms of John Madejski, who he completely understood the mission when he took it on. He was very well aware of the club's finances, and he was very willing to take that on, and he was very willing to support it. But he also wanted the club to be well looked after. But he did keep dipping into his pocket to sort of pay out small fees here and there to bring in extra players. And but yeah, he was very circumspect about it. And so there was just a bunch of free agents that came and went. There was
Right.
as I mentioned, all those youth players who got a break in the team. I think there was like 11 sort of
Yeah.
kids under 20 who managed to break into the team. So it was, it was kind of that thing about spaghetti, isn't it? You throw it against the wall and hope it sticks. So
It did sound like, it does sound like the Ruben Sellers first season in some ways, where you're just throwing
yeah,
anything you can in terms of free agents, youth
just see what
players.
works. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, very, very interesting. So, was John Madejski, I know you spoke to him for this as well. And I've spoken to him before and found it quite intimidating just because of the man that he is to the
yeah.
club. But, was that more or less intimidating than speaking with Mark McGhee?
Different, but probably similarly intimidating. He's a hugely confident man.
Yes.
Um,
Very
and
nice, very friendly whenever I've
yeah, really
spoken.
very friendly and happy to pick up the phone and have a chat. And
Yep.
yeah, was quite happy to meet me in person if I'd have been able to get there. So he's a really good guy, and you can see he's very proud of what he did for Reading, and rightly so, because it wasn't just what he did financially for Reading. He set that real blueprint for when we've been successful. It's been because of the way that he ran the club. It's
Yeah.
that the big changes he really made were obviously the stadium, but then coming up to like 99, 2000, the end of Tommy Burns' reign, was moving away from a reserve team system and really focusing on the youth system,
Yeah.
and putting the director of football in place, and then the arrival of Niall Clark as sports scientist and John Fern as physio. It was really, at the time, pretty groundbreaking stuff for a team in the third tier, and that was all down to him. And I think the thing he's most proud of is the way he ran the club, is that he put his trust in people,
Hmm.
because he's the first to acknowledge he didn't know a lot about football to begin with, and I'm not entirely convinced he's the biggest fan now. He's the biggest fan of Reading, and that's the thing that's the most important, and
Yeah.
that's what he really did that made a difference. Was he put his trust in people, and he employed really good people, and generally he employed sort of quite deep thinking people. So if you
Mm.
think about Mark McGhee, you think about Steve Coppell, Eamon Dolan,
Of course.
Nicky Hammond. They're all kind of thinkers rather than rah rah guys, and
Yeah.
that's when Reading is successful. Is when they think about what they're doing, and they do. Yeah, they really commit to that plan, and they commit to sort of not signing kids all the time, but
Yeah.
buying good young players, and that makes a difference. And back in 93, 94, McGhee was kind of lucky, and they had three youth players who were they kind of been in and around the first team for a while in A.D. Williams, Scott Taylor, and Archie Lovell.
Right. Never heard of them.
Particularly not A.D. Williams. He's nothing to do with
Yeah.
that.
Can't find
Nothing to
him
do
these
with
days.
that. Yeah, but yeah, they were kind of ready made, and they were just waiting there. But yeah, it was Archie Lovell's story of breaking into the team is is one of my favourite parts of the book. He's
Well, I don't want to have you completely spoil everything from the book, but why don't you give us the trailer version of the Archie Lovell introduction?
okay, so yeah, Archie Lovell was probably out of the three players I mentioned, he was the one who struggled to break into the team most.
Yeah.
He also happened to play in Mark McGhee's position, and with
Mm.
Mark McGhee being player manager and coming along, it was quite hard for Archie to break into the team. Um, there was a point where he almost went out on loan somewhere. There was also an occasion where he mouthed off in the press about that he should be in the team ahead of McGhee. So yeah, there was a lot of ups and downs before him getting in the team, but
Yeah.
once he got in, um, McGhee loved him and really put his faith in him. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's almost like it's a hold up for a second in that literally the manager is ahead of you in the position. But I suppose once that ends, nobody better to kind of be your coach than somebody that has played in your position.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is also the era of a very now famous face, playing for Reading, in Phil Parkinson. So what impact, in the book and on the team, does Phil Parkinson have?
He has a huge impact. Reading were really lucky um, in that they found out through one of the players that he was available
Right.
because Bury had just been relegated, and it took a really small fee to bring him to the club. And one of my favourite parts of the book is sort of discussing Reading's midfield,
Yeah.
um, because what McGhee wanted, he wanted to be able to do everything with his midfield, and he brought in players who all kind of did slightly different things. He had Kevin Dillon, who was really, really good on the ball. He had Mickey Gidding, who just never ever stopped running and had a good eye for goal. He had Scott Taylor, who was the same out on the wing. He had Michael Gilks, who was just absolutely
Mm.
lightning fast. And
Yeah.
then the one thing that was missing was, I mean, enforcer's not the right word for what Phil Parkinson was, but he brought a lot of physicality to the
I like
midfield.
enforcer. I've heard the word destroyer before, and I think that's a little bit more insulting than an enforcer.
Yeah.
So I think you picked a good word there, Al.
So yeah, it was what he the real thing. You know, Kevin Dillon was a hard player, and Mick Gooding was a hard player.
Yeah.
They weren't afraid of anything, but they didn't have, I don't know, kind of a Phil Parkinson was just a bit different, just that sort of slightly more never say die, would run through. I catalogued some of the injuries he played through, and he was
Yeah.
just always available, never wanted to be out of the game. But under Colin Lee, his passing improved all the time. The whole time he was at Reading, he got better, and he was a really good passer of the ball in the end. And yeah, he just had so much passion in the midfield, and he was just yeah, that real never say die and sort of drag people along with him. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and again, in terms of setting the foundation, right? Like this is the foundation for the midfield that would go on to be, the Harper and Sidwell midfield later, in
yeah.
Reading's history. And so, where I guess like knowing that that's coming later, how much importance do you place on this midfield that Mark McGhee put together?
It was such a change because back in the mid 80s, Ian Branfoot was in charge, and Reading were playing very long ball. It
Yeah.
was always just get the ball forward quickly, try and win it back, and then get the ball in the box. And that was it for years and years. And that's what Reading fans knew. And when Mark McGhee came along, he was always going to pass the ball. That was just,
Mhm.
he said, it's the way I played with every team that I played with. And so that's the way that my team was going to play. And he wanted
Yeah.
to attack, and he always wanted to attack. And it was hugely entertaining once it got going, but
Yeah.
it took a while. He just absolutely insisted that Reading would pass the ball, and Colin Lee was completely onside. It was what he wanted to do, and they both believed it would work. And there really were very few teams playing like that in the lower divisions at that
I was
time.
gonna say, yeah, and I imagine the fans probably got on his back too, right, at points, because even now, in the modern era, there are still fans that would prefer that you get the ball forward quickly and you go from there with that very
Go and
direct
create a chance. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the thing.
exactly.
So if
Like
you
if
get the
they
ball in the box, you can create a chance. But yeah, he
Yeah,
just he was absolutely adamant that his team would pass the ball, and that was the
mm,
way they were going to be successful. He'd rather lose, and sort of try and pass the ball. He just There were teams that he would always try and wind up Stockport because they were a huge physical battling.
yeah,
I think it's one of my favourite phrases in the book. I describe them as the footballing version of brutalist architecture. It they were
excellent.
they were they were the polar opposite of Reading under McGhee, and yeah, he,
Yeah,
he he brought in that passing game, and yeah, the fans didn't like it to begin with because they'd been so successful playing long ball football. We'd
right.
won 13 games in a row from the start of the season. We got promoted into the top division. We'd won the CMOD Cup final, which for Reading was the best we'd ever done.
Yeah,
So it was people thought that was what worked, but yeah, McGhee stuck to his guns, and as you say, it laid the foundations for the way Reading played for years and years, which was fullbacks bombing on, good
yeah,
wingers, and get the ball in the box from sort of much higher up the pitch, and do much more damage that way. So yeah,
yeah,
you can really see the sort of the through flow of how it went from Parkinson and Osborne in midfield, and
yeah.
then under Alan Pardew, obviously he was the one that brought in Harper. Did he sign Sidwell? I think he did.
I'm afraid that's
I think
your
he did. I'm not
remit.
sure.
I was a little young.
But yeah. People are screaming at me for it's not remembering. So yeah,
Don't worry, people are screaming at me for being a child while I'm doing this interview. So you're not in trouble, Al, at all. Don't worry. So Mark McGhee was right? Like he made this change to the style. I think you refer to it. I really like it as a sort of slick passing side on a minuscule budget, which is quite impressive. So tell us briefly again, trailer version about the kind of success that Reading would go on to have with Mark McGhee.
um, yeah. It took him about 18 months, and the telling thing was that the players were buying in after. You could tell the players were buying in really very quickly. The
Hmm.
results weren't coming, but from reading the quotes in the press, you could tell that the players enjoyed the style of play, and they enjoyed playing for Mark McGhee because he's a really funny guy,
Yeah.
and you can see why the players liked him because he's very confident and he's very much in charge, but he also was able to have a joke with the players because he was so close to having played. It sort of gave him that credibility on both sides of the ball. And yeah, so you could see sort of from early on that from the newspaper reports and from watching the games that the style of play started to change. And you could see it working, even if the results weren't coming. But everybody was really patient about it. Even when Reading almost dropped, they were like right at the foot of the table after the start of McGhee's second season. And if that were happening now, there would be howls from the press that, this isn't working. It's going to, it's all over.
It'd be house for me as well, Al. We can throw me under the bus as well. I'd probably be calling for the manager's head at that point.
And then like halfway through the second season, it just clicked. They won a really tough away game at Leyton Orient, and it just took off. Yeah. The team just really gelled, and it was the players that he brought in, not the first pre-season, but the second pre-season. He signed 4 players. He signed Phil Parkinson, he signed Jeff Hopkins, he signed Jimmy Quinn, and then the previous, sort of midway through the previous season, he signed Shaka Hislop. And so he signed 4 players who are 2 you would definitely say are Reading legends in Jimmy Quinn and Shaka Hislop. And then, 3, Phil Parkinson as well. He played over 300 games for the club. And Jeff Hopkins, who was just a really solid player for Reading. He was a top division player, and he dropped right down to Reading because he'd had a lot of injury problems. But those players coming in and then having the time to settle into the team, it set Reading on the course for some huge success. Yeah. And then when they did get promoted up to Division 1, which is what's the Championship now, he made 3 really excellent signings in Darius Dubček, Simon Osborne, and Andy Bernal, all again on a really strict budget. And Darius Dubček was like nothing you've ever seen. he was so much better than any other player that I'd seen play for Reading. He was just an absolute dream on the ball, and his left foot was just, he was a really interesting guy to talk to. He's so charismatic, but he was involved in a huge scandal in Polish football.
Oh man!
But came back from that and is now having spoken to him, I can see why he's a pundit on Polish TV for like the Champions League coverage and that kind of. So,
well, speaking of pundits, I'll ask you about, because the foreword for this book was written by Shaka Hislop, which I think is a fantastic. That's a great get, right? Like to have the foreword written by Shaka. Shaka is all over the television here in the US.
He's a pundit on ESPN, right?
He is, yeah, but I don't think he's quite as prominent on UK TV at the moment.
No, I don't think
so. So, what did it mean to have Shaka do the foreword for the book?
It was amazing. Yeah, he's the nicest guy I spoke to. He's just such a nice guy. He's easygoing, he's friendly, and he's enthusiastic. And I think he's Reading's best goalkeeper. I started going in like early 90s. I started going, I think he's Reading's best keeper. And he went on to play in the World Cup. He played in an FA Cup final for West Ham. He played in the top division for. He went to a team that almost won the league in Newcastle.
I was going to say, I almost think of him as I think of him as a Reading legend, but I think of him as a Newcastle legend as well. And the thing I always think about with Shaka is that he was a great player and a good guy because he's a club legend at multiple clubs, which is always a vote of confidence, I'd say. Yeah,
I think he's hugely popular at Portsmouth, where he won the Championship title. And West Ham as well, where he spent sort of a couple of different spells. He's won sort of multiple awards for his work with there's a charity called Show Racism the Red Card. He was given the freedom of the city of Newcastle, and he won I can't remember if it's a FIFA award or an FA award for his work with that as well. So he's really incredible guy. And it was
intimidating interview or chat you probably had to have, I imagine, with a former player.
Sorry, say that again.
probably one of the least intimidating interviews or chats that you had to have with a former player, I imagine, just because he is such
Absolutely, yeah. He was really very very easygoing. Yeah, the interview. I had terrible technical problems the first time
oh
I
no,
tried to, and he was so gracious about it, and he was like,
yeah.
"Yeah, no problem. We'll just sort it out for another time." And it was yeah, he was just a really good guy, and yeah,
Well,
he's got
jumping into intimidating or less intimidating moments while you were talking to these guys, you presumably had to start asking Mark McGhee about when he became a bit of a pantomime villain,
a dig, yeah.
for Reading fans. How does he feel about that after all, all these years later now? I imagine he's had a bit of time to reflect.
Um, I think fairly he stands up for himself.
Yeah,
You know, I think the big thing that he always, the first thing he always mentions is that McGhee gave him permission to talk to Leicester, um, which is who he left Reading for,
yeah,
and he felt that that was a signal that if he wanted to leave, he was able to leave,
right.
um, and that's kind of his standpoint on it, is that he was given the opportunity to talk to them, and the more he talked to them, the more he wanted to do it. He
Yeah,
said also, people said, don't do it, hold on a bit longer, things are going really well here, other opportunities will come up. And the more he heard that, the more he wanted to go to Leicester and prove everybody wrong, because
right.
that's kind of his character, I think, is he always wanted to prove people wrong. That
Yeah,
was what he wanted to do with the style of play, and that was what he wanted to do with the budget he had. He just wanted to show that he could do it anyway.
yeah,
Um, because yeah, he just, it's just his personality, and he wasn't prickly about it at all. And when I said to him, I really appreciated what he did for Reading,
yeah.
because it was amazing what he did for Reading. It was just a joy to watch. It was so much fun to go and watch Reading when he was the
Mm,
manager. So
yeah.
yeah, I think he was really grateful for that, and but also stood up for himself and said, "Yeah, I left, and it was my choice, and
Yeah.
that's how it happened." I mean, one of the big things in the book is the sort of the timing of how things happened. Is I'm not sure if everybody knows the story, but there was a massive splash on the front of the Evening Post saying that McGhee was staying, and yeah,
Oh no.
he'd already
Oh
left.
dear.
So
Okay.
the following day, the paper said betrayed. Yeah, everybody
Oh,
called him every name under the sun, and the
yeah.
fans sort of yeah, for years while he was Wolves manager, we loved taunting him whenever he came back. So yeah,
It must be, I mean, so tough in that era too. Whereas, nowadays social media cuts both ways, but it does at least give you a right to reply to absolutely anything.
yeah,
Whereas in those days, it must have been so hard to actually get any kind of message out there, honestly, to the fans
yeah. I
that
mean,
meant.
he managed to speak. He spoke to the press a couple of times, and he didn't really help himself, because
Mm,
he was so confident in himself. He was and still is a bit of a wind up merchant, I think.
yeah.
And he's from the Alex Ferguson school of try and wind up the opposition, and I
Hmm.
think that he enjoyed that, and it didn't really help relations between he and the Reading fans.
Yeah.
But
It's
he's
part
in
of
the
the
Hall of
game.
Fame. He's in the Star Hall of Fame now, so I think, on both sides, I think he's very proud of what he achieved. And I think all of us, well, I can't speak for everybody, but I think the vast majority of Reading fans are very grateful for what he did for Reading. So, yeah.
I'll put you on the spot then. Is he Reading's second, I think, second best ever manager? I think Steve Coppell will always take the number one position, but is he Reading's
Yeah, I
second
think
best
so.
ever manager?
Is he Reading second? So, I mean, the other options, I guess, there's Alan Pardew, there's
Yeah,
Ian
I was going to
Brandt,
that.
there's Maurice Evans, and then I'm not well versed enough in the history to really know beyond Maurice Evans going back. Um, I think probably he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Alan Pardew was kind of a part of a system.
Hmm.
Um, he was a really good manager, but I think he had a lot more backing than Mark
Yeah.
McGhee did, and whereas Mark McGhee, yeah, he worked on that smaller budget, and yeah, he had a. I think, yeah, I think he probably is.
It reminds me a little of Brian McDermott, just in terms of, the season that he got us promoted. Obviously, he was working against sides in Southampton and West
Yeah,
Ham that had much, much bigger budgets, and more depth in their squad, in that way. I do have to ask you, what do you think the Premiership would have looked like for us if we had won that playoff final?
bizarre because I don't know where Reading would have played because
Yeah,
obviously Elm Park was
yeah,
terraced on three sides, and I don't, I really don't think Reading would have been allowed to have played there.
no,
So from memory, the rumours at the time were like going to Loftus Road, and
Oof.
it would have been
Oh,
bizarre. And yeah, I mean Simon Osborne, who was Reading's key player, probably would have stayed. Scott Taylor probably would have stayed. Shaka, I really don't know. I think Shaka was he was probably too good for Reading. I think he probably still would have left. But the
yeah,
core of the team, I think, would have stayed together much better.
hmm,
At that time, it wasn't so hard to go up and stay up. I don't think.
right. The
Um,
financial gap wasn't quite as big.
yeah, sort of knowing in retrospect that Simon Osborne would have a lot of knee problems for the next couple of years, it would have put a sort of a real downer on things. Would have made it really difficult. And Jimmy Quinn and Mick Gooding as managers, I don't think it really worked. I don't think joint managers is ever a good position to be in. I think
No,
a boss and an assistant is the best approach. You kind of need to have the buck stop with somebody. But you look,
yeah.
Swindon got promoted and then shipped 100 goals and got absolutely smashed every week. Which I take
Better
that. Well,
Swindon
no, I
than
do
us.
take. I do take quite a lot of joy in saying that. But
Yeah, yeah.
and Barnsley did the same. They got promoted playing really good football and they got relegated very easily.
Hmm.
So it was, yeah, I think Reading probably would have really struggled as a combination of sort of what we know of how the players got injured and the playing the stadium situation would have been
Yeah.
a real difficulty, I think. So it would have been a
And
struggle. Yeah,
you mentioned Elm Park there, and sort of like, this is 1998 is when the Madejski opened.
yeah.
So obviously McGhee had left before that happened, but Elm Park, and the real life Tilehurst End, how do they appear as a character almost in the book?
um, I loved the place. It
Yeah.
was run down. It was ramshackle. But it was great fun because the
Hmm.
pitch was so close to the stands you could lean over and almost touch the players. The
Yeah.
atmosphere was really good because the South Bank had this great big roof on it, and you had when it was full, it made an incredible noise, and it was yeah, it I don't know, like it's at the start of the book. I mention a couple of a couple of different viewpoints on it. Shaka
Yeah.
had been playing college soccer in America, and this was like a proper stadium with a
Right.
pitch with grass on it, and it was the most incredible place he had ever seen. He thought this was the best stadium that he would ever play in. And
Yeah.
then later on, when Borislav Mihailov, who'd just been playing in the World Cup in America for Bulgaria, came along, and yeah, I don't know if this story is true or not. It may well be apocryphal, but Jeff Hopkins relayed that Bobby, as he was called, turned up at the stadium and assumed it was the training ground,
Yeah.
and then he was told that this was the actual ground, and
Yeah.
in his thick accent, he said, "But your ground, this is shit."
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very different viewpoints on it, but yeah, I absolutely loved the place. It was tucked in to all the houses. It just real old fashioned football ground, and it
Yeah.
was yeah, just that being close to the pitch is the thing that I remember most about it. Being on the terraces, it just, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So looks like it was a fantastic experience, getting to write this book and meet your heroes like you were speaking about. The book is fantastic. A few of
Thank
us
you.
have read it here at the TIlehurst End and really recommend it. Listeners go out and get it. What though, Al, are you writing next? What is coming, down the pipe for you?
Um, Kind of started working on something to cover Alan Pardew's time in charge. It
Mm,
was a time of huge change for the club with, as we discussed earlier, the sort of the sports science coming in, the
yeah,
real focus on the youth setup and the change to the director of football model. And Alan Pardew's quite a character, I think. So, and obviously
yeah,
Martin Allen was at the club. Kevin Dillon became coach. Yeah, there's a lot of very strong characters at the club at that time, and on the pitch, it was a really good time as well. There was that amazing last day at Brentford when Jamie
yeah,
Cureton popped up to score that majestic goal that he scored to equalise. So yeah, and it would include probably my sort of favourite 5 minutes as a Reading fan when Nicky Forster came onto the pitch and changed everything against Wigan. It was
mhm,
I remember I remember turning to the person sat next to me. Reading were losing 1-0 with like 5 minutes to go or 10 minutes to go, and Pardew finally brought Nicky Forster on after we'd been huffing and puffing all game long. And I just
yeah,
turned to him and said, he hasn't given him long enough to make an impact. And yeah, 10 minutes later, I was screaming down the phone to my brother-in-law back at home and telling him how Nicky Forster was the best striker in the world and
yeah.
he'd won the game for Reading. It was yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, that's probably what I'd like to do next. I've sort of started doing some sort of background research for it and started writing the introduction and that kind of thing. So
I
yeah,
would
that's what
definitely,
I'd like to do next.
I would
I
definitely
need a
read that.
title for it though. I'm struggling
Yeah.
to come up with a title for that one. Magic Hat was easy. It was like it's probably the first thing that I came up with was the title, whereas
Oh
this
yeah.
time I'm struggling to sort of come up with something. I've got a working title, which is so the commentary in the game that you can find on YouTube is so it goes Curitan, yes, like that. So that's a possibility for the title. And then the next part of it is majestic finish. So I was thinking maybe that as a title as well. That one kind of rolls off the tongue a bit better. So yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
majestic finish kind of sums up the Nicky Forster game and the game that Curitan where Curitan scored against Brentford. So yeah, maybe that's what I'll go for. So yeah,
All right, all right. Well, you referred to me as sickeningly young earlier, but the good
I
news
did.
is we've now linked up. Nicky Forster is my first ever favorite Reading player.
Oh, okay.
I loved Nicky Forster,
Yeah.
so I would definitely read that.
He was an awesome player for Reading.
Yeah,
His pace was it changed the way that Reading played. It was we went from like a 4-4-2 side to 4-5-1, and yeah, he was extraordinary in that formation.
really dynamic player, and I play these days as a forward. But when I started my youth career, I wanted to be more of a defender, and Nicky
Yeah.
Forster changed all of that for me. Changed the trajectory of how I play football.
Have you got
Um,
his pace?
Maybe not his pace, but
Enough.
something in there. Yeah. So the book, Magic Hat, Madejski, McGhee, and Reading Football Club, is available now. It's available on Amazon, .co.uk, as both a Kindle and a lovely hardcover edition.
That's
Is there
right.
anywhere else people can find it, Al?
I mean, if you want to go to your local bookshop, they'll be able to order it in for you. All of the online sellers will have it. Um, and yeah, I mean, yeah, if you want a signed copy, you can always write to me and I can get copies from the publisher and I can do signed copies.
Fantastic.
Um, so yeah, but the main places are yeah, Amazon, your local bookshop, or yeah, on Kindle. So
I
yeah,
really like calling out the local bookshop. Actually, I think that's a good idea. Is that, you know, this is a Reading fueled, you know, by fans for fans sort of book, right? So, you know, if
Yeah,
we can also make it a community thing and order it from Reading, you know, bookstores, whether those be, you know,
yeah,
independent or not, I think that's only a good thing. Yeah. So good
yeah.
on you
Um,
for that.
I forgot to say, yeah, you should actually be able to get physical copies in Waterstones in Reading. So last time I
Nice.
checked, they could have copies. So yeah,
Fantastic. Fantastic. Al, this has been an absolute pleasure. And if anyone's taking their summer holiday in August, you're going out. The book is available right now, so make sure that you don't delay. Make sure you get that. You know, I recently had a plane trip where I didn't bring enough entertainment, and I quite frankly wish I had the book with me at that time. So yeah. Anything else, Al, before I let you go here?
um, no. So the one thing I will say is about the title of the book.
Yeah.
Everybody says Reading Football Club. So the way I did it is so that it rhymes. Is so it's
Okay. Good.
Madejski,
Okay.
McGhee, and Reading FC like that. So yeah,
You know what? I was about to read it out like that, and I didn't want to cut short if you had meant for it to be fully out. But I'm glad we were on a wavelength there.
yeah.
So wonderful. Al, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great fun, and it's yeah, I always enjoy listening to the pod. So yeah, keep it
Fantastic.
up.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, listeners, thank you for checking out the pod today. Like I said, and I'll say one more time, please do go out and buy Magic Hat from, you know, a good local Reading bookstore. That's the best possible way to do it. But in any case, make sure that you read it. And yeah, let's make sure that we give Al enough encouragement to make sure that he gets that next
It will
book
help.
out.
Yeah,
You're becoming our modern Reading historian here, which
yeah,
is
that would be
great.
good. Take over from Alan Clements and David Downs and Roger
Yeah,
Titford and those guys who've written about Reading for years. So yeah,
yeah, and they've done a fantastic job, but you have as well. So really,
thank you.
really appreciate it. All right, fans. Well, make sure that you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots of good videos and all kinds of guests coming out of the woodwork for the next few weeks, which should be a lot of fun. And we'll be back very soon with reviews of the final preseason games. Come on, you Royals.